helping you with real estate, Mr. Mike Johnston.
So let's talk about a few different things. Where do we get liability as real estate agents from? Where are some of the areas that we might have some liability?
Liability?
Yes.
Contracts.
Contracts. So when we participate in writing up a contract, we would have some responsibility and liability there. What else?
Marketing.
Marketing. If we do something there, if we market it one way and it's not supposed to, like it has something that's not really there, we would have some responsibility. So we've got paperwork, marketing, social media, advertising. Even if we were to co-list it with somebody, because the actions that that other agent were to do affects us because you're a team. So co-listing can do that type of stuff. We have maybe even some of your help, your unlicensed people, assistants, others that are helping you. All of those different things have certain responsibility and liability that can be there. Okay? So what we want to do is talk about some of the different things that we have liability for. Another thing that we didn't mention is also broker price opinions. Broker price opinions, or BPOs, sometimes people will ask us to do certain things. So errors and omissions insurance. Do you happen to know how much the deductible is in case something were to happen? If someone were to make a claim against you as a licensee, how much do you have to pay to defend yourself? Do you know?
I don't know, huh?
There's a $10,000 deductible. The first $10,000 the agent is responsible for, but then it goes up to $1 million. So if there's a big claim or some other stuff, everything will be taken care of, so to speak, but you're still responsible for everything before that. So it's usually best to try to make sure you can take care of things or resolve it in some way, shape, or form before it gets to that $10,000 mark. Okay? Now, have you ever had somebody ask you that says, I just need to know the value of my property? Maybe my grandma's going to give it to me and they just want to know for tax purposes how much it's worth. Or I just need to know for insurance how much my property's worth. Have you ever had somebody ask you those type of things?
Not yet.
Not yet, but someday they will. Now, are you able to do something like that? It's kind of a trick question.
As far as what they need for tax, I don't think so, but I could do, you could run an analysis, but is it legal?
Okay.
Is it that way?
Here's the different little thing. It talks about brokers' price opinions and what you can do. So let's just go ahead and pull up this cool little TV that I've got here, and let's just change the channel to brokers' price opinions. So there we go, brokers' price opinions. All right, got to get to the right thing. Brokers' price opinions. So when we get to broker price opinions, that's guideline number 20 in our book. So here's 17, scrolling down to 18, 19. Oh, I went a touch too far. Okay, so here's the broker price opinion part. Now there are certain things that licensees can and can't do. So take a look at this. The Idaho Real Estate Appraisers Act prohibits persons who are not licensed or certified by the Idaho Real Estate Appraisal Board for doing any type of real estate appraisal, including an analysis, an opinion, or conclusion relating to the value of real estate. The Appraiser Act does grant exemptions for licensed real estate salespersons and brokers. So here's some of the things that we can do. And our association fought hard to be able to get these type of things in the law. Number one, comparative market analysis exception. So if we're going to do a CMA, market analysis, we can do that as long as, let's take a look at this, a licensed real estate broker, associate broker, salesperson who, in the ordinary course of his business, gives an opinion of the price of real estate for the purpose of a prospective listing or sale, provided that such person does not represent himself as being a state licensed or certified real estate appraiser. So if we're going to be getting a listing, we can go out there and do a market analysis on the property and come up with a value for how much we believe that it would sell for. We can do that.
Okay.
But there's other times and those other questions people ask us. So let's take a look. So scrolling down here, there's some of the questions it asks. A lender calls a real estate broker and requests a BPO, and the lender would or could not disclose the intended purpose of the BPO. May the broker render a BPO that complies with Idaho law? The answer is no. The statute plainly states that a BPO must contain a statement of its intended purpose, and it must be included in the BPO. So if we're asked for that, we can't do it. Now the law, if we go back up a little bit, if we're going to do a BPO, there's these different things that have to be into it. All these different clauses that we see there. Okay, so all those different things that we see must be in a statement in front of the BPO. And most of the time, people don't do that. So there are some exceptions. Okay, so here's the questions again. A lender calls a real estate salesperson, requests a BPO. May a salesperson render the BPO? No. Some states allow salespersons to render BPOs, but Idaho law is very clear that only actively licensed brokers may render a broker's price opinion. What if the lender discloses that it wants to use the BPO in its consideration of a short sale, or a foreclosure, or a modification of an existing loan? Is a broker restricted from rendering a BPO for these intended purposes? The answer is not necessarily. So they just have to disclose in the statement what the purpose is being for. May a salesperson assist a broker in preparing a BPO? Yes, but only if the broker rendering the BPO is the designated broker for the assisting salesperson. And we can go on, but most of the time you don't want to do them because of the liability that's there.
So a quick question.
Go ahead.
So let's say a lender does ask for BPO, they give you a statement and they use it for other purposes. Is that on them as far as the law goes? Are we released from that?
Well, here's the thing. If a lender calls you up and says, we're going to list this property with you and we need to have a value, you're able to do that, to come up with a value. But if they say, oh, we need to have 3 different things on here for our file, and we need you to be one of the 3. And you're not going to get the listing. We just need to have this. Can you do it? We'll pay you $50.
No, because it would only be through you that they could do that.
Well,
no,
so that's why we have to be very careful because of the intent.
Okay.
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 So now that we've talked a little bit about that, let's see. Let's talk about paperwork. So many times we'll have for sale by owners that have chosen not to utilize our services, which is fine. People can do that. But we offer so many services for a bundled price that helps us out, and it can also help them. But let's say that a person gets to the point that they end up wanting to hire somebody or need some assistance in doing the paperwork. What are their options? Do you know what they can do?
No, go ahead and keep talking.
One of the options can be that they would hire an attorney. So an attorney, he or she could be able to assist them in the paperwork and draft the documents for them. They don't negotiate, they don't do anything, they just take the words that they want, write it out, and have that be done. So that's what an attorney would be doing if they were hired on a for sale by owner. Another option, they could contact a title company. The title company can provide them papers that the people would fill out themselves to put together their contract and do stuff. And everyone would negotiate on their own, and they do what they want to. The third option, which is not always the best option, but it still is an option, is many times that people will try to find a real estate agent or a licensee who would be willing to, quote unquote, do the paperwork for them. Now, with that, doing the paperwork for them, there's more to it than just the paperwork. And what do I mean by that? There are certain requirements in the law that we as licensees in the state of Idaho must fulfill for a customer, meaning someone we don't represent, or for a client, someone that we do represent. And some of these things cannot be taken away. We can't get rid of them. They have to stay with us at all times. So we have these responsibilities that are there.
Abrogated.
What was that?
Abrogated.
That's the word.
Yeah.
Sometimes people don't understand the word abrogate, so I try to use easy words. Okay, so with that, when we're trying to help somebody out, there's more than just helping them out or just doing the paperwork. Some of the questions that come up to mind is, when we help, we still have liability, where the attorneys and other people many times don't have any liability, but we do because we're licensed. So we have the liability even if we're helping it out, whether we charge a fee or not.
So what you're saying is we need to make sure that we are delivering those customer level duties as statutorily required.
Well, we're required to, and I'm going to go through those here in just a second.
Right, I know we're required to, but I'm saying we need to make sure we are.
We are. Otherwise, we're the ones that have that liability and responsibility.
And so, Mike, you're probably going to get to this, but I wanted to also find out how our errors and omissions would kick in if something happens while we were, and I'm sure you'll get to that, but that was one thing I wanted to talk about.
And part of it, talking about our errors and omissions insurance earlier in this presentation, was talking about the first $10,000 the agent is responsible for. So if you make a mistake or do something and you end up needing to make a claim against the errors and omissions insurance company, the first $10,000 you as a licensee are required for.
Okay.
But let's jump back to some of the duties that we have. So right now, whether you represent a buyer or a seller, or you're working with a buyer or seller in any real estate transaction, whether it's a for sale by owner or in a regular course of action, there's certain things that you're required to do. And I'm going to just scroll on here onto the screen and show this to us, so we can talk a little bit more about some of those duties that we owe in section 54-2086. I'm almost there. Okay, in 2086, duties to a customer. So here we go. Well, there we go. It's showing it now, which is good. 2086, duties to a customer. If a buyer, prospective buyer, or seller is not represented by a brokerage in a regulated real estate transaction, that buyer or seller remains a customer. And as such, the brokerage and its licensees are non-agents and owe the following legal duties and obligations. So these are all the things that we're required to do whether we represent somebody or not. And like in this example we're talking about with the for sale by owner, we're still a licensee, and these are the things that we have to do. We can't just do the paperwork. There's a lot more duties and liability that we have. A, to perform ministerial acts to assist the buyer or seller in the sale or purchase of real estate. That's this section right here. And we can have that type of stuff there, okay? The second part talks about to perform these acts with honesty, good faith, reasonable skill, and care. The third, to properly account for monies or property placed in the care and responsibility of the brokerage. That comes down to the earnest money. That could be keys to the house. That could be anything. So there's lots of different concerns we have to determine. D, to disclose to the buyer, customer, all adverse material facts actually known or which reasonably should have been known by the licensee. So if we're just writing it up, we may never have seen the home, but we're required to know certain things, because if we can see that there's a defective roof, we're supposed to disclose that. And if we're just doing paperwork, quote unquote, like an attorney or somebody, we still have these requirements that we're required to do. E, to disclose to the seller, customer, and all adverse material facts actually known or which reasonably should have been known by the licensee. So an adverse material fact could be that this person can't get financing. An adverse material fact could be for a buyer that there's some problem with the property that we are aware of, but the seller hasn't disclosed. See, we're still even required to make sure that they fill out the property disclosure form. Otherwise, we have a problem with that. We're also required that we do the lead-based paint. If not, we can be liable for $10,000 from the Environmental Protection Agency, because when a licensee is involved, we take over certain responsibilities for the seller. In a for sale by owner without a licensee, and they don't do that, they're liable for it. with a for sale by owner with a licensee, we're liable for it. Continuing on with our stuff. If a customer has entered into a compensation agreement or customer services agreement with the brokerage shall have the obligation to be available to the customer to receive and timely present all written offers and counteroffers. So if they're going to compensate us for whatever fee there is, $1, 10 cents, 1%, 2%, whatever, we have to accept the offer. So what if you're doing all this work here to help out with the paperwork, and while you're doing the paperwork, there's 3 offers that come in? Well, according to this, you're obligated to be able to receive all 3 offers, to present all 3 offers, to assist in countering them back. And what if nothing happens here and you have to wait another week and then you do the whole thing over again? So all these things that you're doing come into the time and also liability and responsibility for you. So let's go ahead and continue on a little bit more.
May I interject just a second with that, Mike?
Go ahead.
Okay, because I can save my question until later as well. My thinking is, so say we're doing all of this for 1%, the paperwork, just as a base figure, and we receive multiple offers. What if and we all know that this isn't, the best case scenario. We want to list the property, we want to get what we're worth, et cetera, et cetera. But say I've agreed to do that, and I say I'm going to do it for 1% of the purchase price, plus $75 for each additional offer that comes in. Can I do that?
Yes, and I'm going right into that.
Oh, see, perfect timing. Thank you.
I think most of your questions you'll have, I'll answer.
Okay, I'll hold them then until the end.
Okay. So jumping back into our screen here, so you can kind of see what's going on. The duties set forth are mandatory and may not be waived or abrogated, either unilaterally or by agreement. Nothing in this section prohibits the brokerage from charging a separate fee or commission for each service provided to the customer in the transaction. So with that could come back to what you're saying, charge a different fee. If there's more people there or more offers, you can charge something else. Yes, it doesn't prohibit us to do that, but all these things must be in writing ahead of time. And a lot of times we don't think about that. Okay, so keep that in mind as well. A non-owed agent brokerage and its licensees owe no duty to a buyer customer to conduct an independent inspection of the property for the benefit of that buyer customer, and owe no duty to independently verify the accuracy or completeness of any statement made by a seller. Same thing goes into, for the seller, the opposite direction. Okay, so those are a couple of the different things that are responsible for us with that. Okay, so when you do this, sometimes people think, should I get a listing signed? Because they've already had these people here. Should I get a listing signed so I can put this for sale by owner in the MLS and it helps out my stats? Well, some people have done that. They go out and get a listing on the for sale by owner, a one-party listing, but then they're obligating themselves to more liability and responsibility for that 1% or whatever was agreed upon. Should I enter this listing, people ask, into the MLS for statistic purposes, even though I don't represent them? That's a possibility that you can do that. Sometimes people say, well, maybe I should represent the buyer and not the seller in here because I know them better. They're the ones that are talking to me. That's something else that can be considered, what's going on. Now, let's think about this. Anything that you do as a licensee affects me. My license on the line too. Whether you charge zero or anything, do I want you to have liability and me have liability where we could possibly lose our licenses? So that's why we have to be very cautious. When you're dealing with a for sale by owner and they hire an attorney, the attorney doesn't put down Mike Johnston as the responsible broker. But you do. So I'm liable for something there. And I don't like that liability a lot of the times. Same thing for handling earnest money. When an attorney's involved, they take it, put it in their trust account or something, and that's fine. We make recommendations, and many times we'll put something into the title company to hold it. But what happens if there's a dispute? It still needs to be handled, and I'm the one that has a responsibility to be involved and let people know what's going on in writing. So now I'm obligated to do certain things. I don't think any of us work for free. So we have to be cautious with that. So what are some of the things for compensation? Well, many times people offer, oh, if you just help me with the paperwork, I'll pay you 1%. Okay, well, let's talk about that 1%. Let's say the property is $200,000. 1% of that is $2,000. Many of us, if not all of us, because I believe we're all on the same thing, are on a 70-30 split until we cap. So that's about $1,400 that comes to us on a $200,000 property. What all are we doing for that $1,400? What liability are we assuming and what responsibilities are we taking for that $1,400? I think that many times we sell ourselves short for what we're doing. And, you know, we don't technically have a company policy on doing just the paperwork for somebody, but we do have a company policy on when we get listings. Right now, our office, if we get a listing for anything between 0 and 30,000, it's a 10% brokerage fee, of which we share 5% of that, half of it, to the other side. If it's between 30,000 and 100,000, our company policy is to charge a 7% brokerage fee. And many times we'll split that and give 3.5% to the other side. Anything above 100,000, we typically charge a 6% brokerage fee, of which typically 3% would be shared with the other side. This way we're not price fixing, we're not in some type of cahoots with other people, and there's no standard or a going rate, because all things are negotiable. So we have these different things. So I would recommend, if we're wanting to do some of these other things, maybe talk to these people up front and just say, hey, that's what my services are. I do these different little things for value. I can help negotiate, and talk about some of the other benefits that are there for you, because you're not really in the position to be negotiating for one party or the other in this. But most people do. And when they do negotiate or they're assisting, that could be perceived as an agency violation because you're putting one person above somebody else. So be very cautious whenever you're dealing with multiple parties, of which none of them you're representing, because you need to treat all parties fair and assist them in the right manner. So can you do it? Yes, you can. But you just have to be responsible and look at all the different things that you're doing. I would prefer that you talk about getting a listing ahead of time and doing something along those lines. So let's say it's a $200,000 property, and it would be 6% for our company policy that we would charge. Well, if you bring in the buyer yourself, you might be able to reduce it. So you'd have to mark on the MLS dual or variable commission, yes or no, and say yes, because maybe you do it for 5% if you brought in the buyer, or some other thing here. But typically, if I was to do the paperwork for something, I would really think about 3% because of the liability, responsibility, and other things that you'd be doing. So don't sell yourself short. Let's just see if I've got a couple other things here that I wanted to mention. That's pretty much it. So we talked about the liability at the beginning of our presentation. We talked about that. We talked about where our liability comes from. We talked about errors and omissions insurance and the deductible that's there, that we're responsible for $10,000 in case something happens. And then we went ahead and talked about broker price opinions. Can we do them or not? Then we talked about paperwork. And the paperwork part really comes down to assisting somebody else, like a for sale by owner or even a builder, to do something for them. And that really comes down to everything that I had prepared to talk about today. So, Chris, anybody have any other questions that you have for me that I did not answer?
No, everybody good? I think the one thing that really came to mind was Magali helping Janine, and then having those multiple offers. And I was thinking to myself, well, at this point, how is, you know, especially Magali, when it was 1% of $65,000, mm-hmm. right? You didn't get paid enough for that.
Yeah,
right?
No, during this transaction, and I totally get it. I think it's not even worth it because, like you mentioned it, Mike, I found it myself try to, you know, like be, polite to everybody. And I was telling them, I'm not representing no parties. So you
Yeah.
guys want to negotiate. It's something that you guys have to do between the two of you guys, But at the
Right.
same time, they was having like expectation for me to be the one, pretty much like, like try to take sides and tell them what to do or what, or I don't know. So I found myself like, and I told Chris, I think this is not worth it, So I was doing it just to be, nice.
Yeah. And people ask us all the time to do things, and we really want to help them in any way, shape, or form that we can. So we try to do that type of stuff. Here goes I'm trying to change directions. So we just have to have our limits. We know what we can do. We need to stay in our lane, as we talk about in the Core 2019 part about it. There's certain things that we can do and certain things that we can't do. And the thing is don't sell yourself short.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to assist somebody, that's why I would charge 3% if you're going to help on something like that, because it's great. Even with a manufactured home, sometimes with a manufactured home, they're $5,000 or $10,000 or something. We used to have them for that low. And we ended up charging a flat fee for something like that because there was so much work, and even 10% of $7,500 didn't cover the responsibility and liability we had. $750 to share with two agents. Wow.
Yeah, and I think my point, the one listing, the one house that Magali helped with was they sold it for $65,000. And I know that had I listed that home, I would have listed it for $85,000 easily. So, which would have, and Magali too, because I know what Magali would have been running her figures on. And so had that seller hired her as an agent, she would have well made up for the difference in that, what they saved in not paying someone to list the property. So, I think that's a conversation we can have too, but it feels like we're seeing more of these. Yeah, you completely went away now, Mike. But it does seem like we're seeing more of these because people feel like they can list it themselves and sell it very quickly, which, as we all know, is true in today's market. So, okay.
Wow. It doesn't want me to show up at all.
And now you're gone. All I see is white paper. So, yeah, Magali, Jenny, you guys have anything else? That was helpful. And I'll be the first to admit I really didn't know that our deductible was $10,000. Yeah. Also, something else, Mike. Does our E&O cover when we do our own transactions?
It does have limited coverage for certain things, and that's why we have this additional policy compared to the one that the state puts out, because it does cover some personal transactions that others do not.
That's important to know. That's probably a piece of homework that we should take away with us today, is just figuring out what our E&O really does cover.
Yeah.
And there is a number. There's actually a number that you can call, right, for E&O and talk to somebody.
See, one of the benefits we have is, in case you have some questions about it, first you talk with me and we go through what we have. But if there's some situation or some concerns there, then we have a hotline that we can call and participate in, where we actually have an attorney call us back and talks about some of the different things. And if they need a letter written, something simple like that, many times they'll do that for free for us and write a letter that just says this or that, or answers a certain question that somebody might have. And then after that, if it does need to go into having an attorney, then we would retain them. And that's when the $10,000 starts kicking in, based on what the charges are and what the attorney's actually doing for us. That starts clicking away at that $10,000 deductible, of which the agent is responsible for the first $10,000.